We've just seen how young people are devastated when Christianity is presented to them as a mere preference, and when Christianity isn't presented to them as a forensic faith, it's presented to them as a subjective faith. So, more often than not, they're unprepared to meet these skeptical challenges. So, let us now look at some of the evidence that shows that Christianity is not simply the story of a good moral teacher, but the historical account of the Messiah. Speaking from your time as an atheist, you said, "As I sifted through the Gospels and applied forensic statement analysis to the Gospels, I became concerned that they were actually reliable eyewitness accounts." Professor Wallace, how did you walk away from the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, knowing that these were reliable eyewitness accounts?
Well, you just test them. I mean, look, this is not unusual that we have an account that's written down by somebody and that person is no longer available to us. Even the writer of the report is no longer available to us. A lot of my cold cases, we just finished a case last year that was committed in 1972. I mean, pretty much everyone was passed away, including the suspect, by the time we solved it. So you have these cases where you're trying to solve something on the basis of information you have written down in a supplemental report in which you have no access to either the witness or the writer. So how do I test these things? Well, there's a process by which we test eyewitness accounts in criminal trials. We just ask the 4 questions. Were they really there to see what they said they saw? Can they be corroborated in some way? Have they changed their story over time, or have they been honest and accurate? And finally, do they possess a bias that would cause them to lie to us? So I didn't know any other way to test these things. Now, I actually thought that, again, remember, I had no interaction with Christians and no idea. I didn't own a Bible until I was 35. So by that time, I had been working as an investigator for some time. And all I knew to do was to investigate the claims the way that I would investigate written statements from suspects, written statements from witnesses. And so a forensic statement analysis is one way to do that. But again, those 4 things we talked about are the 4 things that make either a witness reliable or a liar. And so I just needed to know, could these things pass the test? Now, I'll just put it this way. I'm always trying to find a way, right? Because when I talk about this process, it's a lengthy process. I didn't become a Christian in an afternoon. It took probably 6 to 8 months of studying through and applying this process to the Gospels. And I stayed in the Gospels for that period of time before I determined that I was ready to even consider what they had to say about me. But I knew at the end of that process that now how I try to, because I don't have 8 months to spend with you to go through each of those aspects of the investigation. What I try to say, just kind of summarize it, is I got to a place, and if you can imagine this for a second, if most skeptics, if they were to examine the Gospels in any particular approach, if there were no miraculous events in the Gospels, no virgin birth, no walking on water, no miracles performed by Jesus, no healings, no rising from the dead, no dying on a cross and rising afterwards, right? No ascension into heaven. If it was just a story of a preacher, a Jewish rabbi, who taught, and you tracked him across the region, the story tells about his travels, about his disciples, about his messages, all of a discourse, Sermon on the Mount, and then for whatever reason, he is executed on the cross, and the story ended right there. No miraculous events at all. And if you were to have those 4 Gospels, take out the miraculous, and you just looked at those, even if you saw what you thought were apparent differences, I don't think there's a skeptic on planet Earth who would say that that's not a reliable account of Jesus of Nazareth. They wouldn't be denying his existence. If you take out the miracles and just look at those 4 documents, they're going to go, wow, this is very well documented. This dude lived in the 1st century, and he's very well documented. And nobody would doubt. As a matter of fact, if he was like Baha'u'llah, the leader of the Baha'i faith, who just had a set of proverbial teachings and statements, no one doubts that Baha'u'llah lived the life he lived, and nobody would doubt that Jesus existed and lived the life he lived. Where doubt enters is because these things are more than just naturalistic explanations of a person in history. They include the supernatural. And when you realize that that's what really tips the scale, well, then you can look at it and say, well, yeah, so is it just because I have a bias against anything supernatural? Because if I took those things out, nobody would doubt anything about this. Yeah, actually, that's what it is. It comes down to a bias in this generation and in this century, actually in the last several centuries, against supernatural elements. And so that's why you see like the Jesus movement or the Jesus Project will spend time trying to redact out miracle accounts. So I had to ask myself the question, if I test these, they're going to pass this test. I encourage anyone to apply the test. I outline it in Cold Case Christianity, but I'll just tell you that if you test these things, you're going to come down to a position where you just have to ask yourself, okay, so here's what I'm out. Here's why I'm out. I'm out because I don't believe in anything supernatural. And then what I would ask you to test why you think there is nothing outside of nature. And that's why I wrote the book, God's Crime Scene, because I actually did both those investigations kind of simultaneously, because I knew that what was keeping me out over here was that I didn't think there was anything, I always say, outside the room of the universe, outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. But it turns out there are 8 features of the universe that cannot be explained from inside the room. You're going to have to jump outside the room for the best explanation for those. And then I realized, okay, I'm already outside the room for those explanations. Why would I not step outside the naturalistic realm for my examination of the Gospels? And that's really what turned the corner for me.